All right, welcome to TheoLIVE, episode 27. Talking about Hillsong today. Yes, the animation came up too early. It's been one of those kinds of weekends, guys. Chaos over at the Lentini household. All kinds of stuff we're dealing with. Got the Rona sweeping through the home, so that's fun. Yeah, boy. Got some things I want to talk about today. Very excited to talk about this Hillsong thing. I'll wait to get into it. But before I get there, oh man, there's some other exciting stuff going on. Look over here. Look at this. Look at this. Look at that. Look at that number right over here. Do you see it? 986. The countdown to 1K is on. I don't like to always just talk about numbers and things like that, but that 1,000 threshold is important to me because I've been doing this now for consistently for a year. And then before then, I was pretty consistent for 6 months, took a couple months off, trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to do on this online platform called YouTube. And I finally just kind of figured it out over the last few months, really. I would say basically since August, I think I've figured out where I fit into this niche, and it's been fun. It's been really fun to do these videos and connect with you guys and to see a little bit of this community that I've been trying to build on my channel grow a little bit and have people like you watching. That is really cool. Random guy in Saskatchewan, Canada, just talking about theology, talking about things going on in the church. And for some reason, you guys tune in. And to me, that's really cool. And who knows? Who knows what the future has? I've got some plans about, what I'm going to do when I hit that 1K threshold. Definitely going to do a special live show. Definitely going to talk about some new things that I want to do. Because on this YouTube thing, not to make it, this isn't just about YouTube. I'm going to get to Hillsong in just a second. I have a lot to say about Hillsong, and I really want to hear what you guys say. So hop into the chat. Today is important. I really want you guys to jump into the chat and let me know. Have you seen it? What do you think about it? And even if you haven't seen it, what are some of the things that you see in Hillsong and in that story, especially lately with Brian Houston stepping down and all that kind of stuff? I want to know your thoughts. So jump into the chat. Let me know. I definitely want to be interacting with you guys a lot today. That's my hope. That's my goal. I know I did go live early, so that might get into it. But again, Rona, everyone's sick in the house. And so when the quiet or the loudest people are sleeping, you gotta jump on the live stream, make sure that you can actually have a conversation about this thing without, a bunch of coughing and all that kind of stuff. And I definitely wanted to get, I got some videos I need to record because I feel it in the back of my throat, and definitely want to be able to still have content for you guys this week. So all this stuff being said, I'm really excited about 1,000 subscribers. I definitely have plans for the future about this channel and what I want to do, people I want to have on, some of the things I really want to lean into, and also starting some new things. But that'll be whenever, I hit 1,000. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, I'll have it come up once more. Definitely if you're here, like the video, because it's always important to like the video, because there's first it gets out to people supposedly, but also I got haters, I just do. Over the last couple months, some of the videos that I've made have angered some people, and so I got some haters. So for those that support my channel, it's always important for me that you guys like the video, because there are going to be people. I've learned it's not just when I talk about Johnny Mac in that whole situation. I've learned that there are people out there that, want me to be quiet about certain things, and I'm not going to do it. But, it is what it is. So let's get talking about this Hillsong documentary. I was trying. You guys might be able to look it up after here. I was trying to find Genuine JC. I think his name is Jeremy Collins. I'm not too familiar with his channel, but he's here. Ha! All right. Well, this guy. Let's come over here and highlight you, bud. So I'm not too familiar with your channel, but I really enjoyed your conversation with John Adams, who is a friend of the channel here, the other day. Let me know. I'll do this one thing. Like, usually in my comments and in my chat, I'm like, don't you dare drop a link, because you never know where that link is going to go to. And so I'm just like against links in the chats and in the comments. If you put a comment and you share a link, I'm going to delete it. But Genuine JC, drop a link if you have it. I don't know. I couldn't find it. Maybe it got taken down. I know you were having some streaming issues with, showing some clips and whatnot, and the algorithm being like, no, you don't get to talk today. But I really enjoyed your conversation. And so if you could drop the link to that, if you have it, in the chat, I definitely appreciate it. But I was watching that, and to be honest, I don't really have all that much interest in Hillsong. Like, at least to my knowledge, before watching the documentary, I didn't think that like Hillsong had anything to do with my Christian background. You know, I've said it so many times. I come from like this Reformed Independent Baptist kind of background, a little weird, but it worked at the time. And so like we weren't like going around and talking about Hillsong all the time. And I don't remember Hillsong being a big deal growing up. And then in college and seminary and my first, couple ministries, it was just like, I don't care. like people would talk about like Carl Lentz, and it was just like, okay, I get you, man. I made the video private until the copyright claim dispute was finalized. Okay, no worries, man. I just really enjoyed that chat. It was a really good conversation between you two, so that's why I was wanting to highlight it. But no worries. Like, everything on YouTube is like, it's a fight to comment on anything. No one wants you to talk about their thing, so I totally get it. But Hillsong, like I never really knew about Carl Lentz. Like, I knew the names, Brian Houston and Carl Lentz, but I, didn't really look into it. Wasn't interested. I'm more Reformed, so I'm looking into the dead guys, to be honest. Like, most of my favorite theologians and preachers are dead. So, some guy with flashy lights in New York wasn't all that appealing to me. And, talking about Justin Bieber being his pastor and things like that. I just didn't really know. I didn't really have an interest. But then I was watching Genuine JC and John Adams talk about it. And, I'm looking and trying to see, what is everyone else talking about, and all these videos were coming out about this Hillsong documentary. And I was like, okay, I'm going to, sign up for the free trial, gonna watch it and see what I think. And as I began to watch this thing, I was like, oh, I have a lot of strong feelings about this. Like, I don't even know these guys, but I kind of do at the same time. Like, I was watching these things and I just was seeing so many similarities to different ministries, different philosophies of how to do church ministry. And I was just like, this is kind of shocking. So we're definitely going to get into it today. But before we get too far, I do want to say hi to some people that are showing up here in the chat. Chester, I haven't watched the documentary. However, the scandals at the Hillsong are still ongoing. That church is collapsing because pastors of the Hillsong are quitting. Yeah, it's an ongoing thing. Like, even it seems that before they were done with the documentary, like, they had like immediate things happen. Like, there was all kinds of fallout before they even started airing this thing, just from the trailer, I think, because the trailer went around. A lot of people reacted to the trailer. But yeah, Brandon, Haven't seen it yet, but the Christian church as a whole needs to get back to biblical accountability. A huge topic in this, Brandon. I would love to hear your thoughts on accountability, what that looks like, because, yeah, I think that's a huge part of that. And Genuine JC, it was frustrating to see and hear all the spiritual abuse. Definitely, I totally agree. Okay, so here is the link to the live stream with John Adams' ministry. I can't see it over in this this window that I'm looking at, but I'm assuming that he dropped the link there. So definitely check it out after this guy gets done talking. This guy, meaning me. Don hopping in, watched the 3-part documentary this past weekend. Same here. So me and my wife watched it. And I was planning on having a conversation with my wife, with you guys, because I really like doing it with her. Like I'm secretly trying to get her to just be a regular on some live stream, but probably not going to happen. And then when Rona set in, it's just like, okay, not going to make it more complicated. Let's just get this video out and talk about it with you guys. So. What did I think about the Hillsong documentary? Well, I wasn't surprised necessarily because, sometimes you see these churches with the big flashing lights, the concert venues, they're not having church in, some, kind of like humble location. It's, where Coldplay comes and performs, or some really cool band will show up and they'll take over that venue for a weekend, and that's where they're having church. And like churches that do that kind of thing usually, and I don't want to be too dogmatic about it because I don't go to those kinds of churches. Never have, visited maybe, but that's not my jam. That's never been my background. I'm a pretty traditional guy. And I've pastored pretty traditional churches. And, we might have drums, but, we have trumpets at the same time. Like there's still an organ back there. And hopefully nobody plays it. Because the organ, I'm one of my hottest takes, guys. The organ doesn't belong anywhere. Like if it belongs somewhere, the organ belongs Sheol. That's what I think of. Like, go down there and play the organ. Like, I had an office in my first pastorate that was right behind where the organ was, and whenever someone would come in and practice, it was just like shaking and vibrating. And I would try to put headphones on. I had good Bose headphones. It just wasn't going to happen. But that's the kind of churches that I've been a part of, like pretty traditional churches. And so like the big lights, all that kind of stuff was never appealing to me. And when I looked at those kinds of churches, got to be honest, maybe with a little bit of judgmentalism, I would think, oh, they're probably not like really good at theology. Just generally, like those kinds of churches are there to try to attract people. The term that we used to use for those kinds of churches were seeker sensitive. Now, I think that's shifted a little bit, as even in my own perspective, because I do think that the church should, in at least some way, be sensitive to seekers. But that's just how I rolled. So when I was watching this thing, I came in a little bit with that bias of already thinking like these guys are probably pretty shady. And then, the documentary starts and there's a real big focus on Carl Lentz. And what was some of the things that were shocking? I'm going to kind of give like some of my random thoughts on it, and then I want to talk about more about the specific issues. So definitely hop into the chat here. Let me know your specific issues with it, and we'll go through that in a little bit here. But some of my random thoughts were like, especially when it came to like that New York campus, like Hillsong, New York, that I was just like, oh, that's a little weird that they were so new. It was like 2010 or something like that, that the first Hillsong Church was there in the United States in New York. And then I think they had another campus there in Dallas that closed. Let me know if there was another one, but I didn't catch on to the fact that there would have been another one. But it seemed really recent. And I was like, oh my goodness, this church has only been around since like 2010. For some reason, the year 2014 is also popping into my head. But it wasn't very long that this church was there in New York. And, right off the bat, then it must have been that, like Justin Bieber was involved. As a basketball fan, Kevin Durant, former Sonic, former Seattle Supersonic. We drafted him, Oklahoma City. You understand? All right. He's our guy, not yours. They would probably say that he's theirs. But anyways, Kevin Durant also was like involved with the church and things like that. And I was like, wow, like this church really came in and right off the bat was like in headlines. And to me, that's just very odd. And I think it speaks to like their mission, their goal. And that was something that became prevalent, and I'll talk about in a little bit about Brian Houston and the church that I see, all of that. There's a lot of theology to unpack from that one, which we will in a little bit. But I was shocked at how new it was as far as going on in the United States. I was also shocked that, as they tried to talk about the brand of Hillsong and really like focusing on the music, I was shocked to know some of the songs that Hillsong actually came out with. Like I said, like I come from a pretty traditional background, but the music that my church did growing up was like Shout to the Lord and Blaze Spirit Blaze. Remember that? And still being like, what is that? What does that even mean? But, songs like that. And I was just like, oh, Hillsong wrote these songs. And then I looked up like a list of songs that Hillsong did. And a lot of the songs that I grew up on, as CCM in the probably like I was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. There were a lot of songs from Hillsong in there. And I was just kind of shocked. And to me, that speaks a little bit to what they were trying to do as a church, as an institution. They were trying to grow and have influence. And I think that they really succeeded because even me, like, I'm pretty dialed in to what's going on in evangelicalism, and I kind of always have been. I've always paid attention. Like, I knew I wanted to become a pastor when I was like 13, started preaching when I was 13, and I've talked about that before. It's really weird. Pastors, don't let 13-year-olds preach. They're not Spurgeon. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be healthy for them. They're going to have to go through some things if they do end up in ministry. But, like with that being said, like that was my goal. That was what I wanted. And so I started preparing, and I started reading at an early age, reading a lot of John MacArthur, reading a lot of these other guys that my pastor and my church were really involved in. I read a lot of Chuck Swindoll. Think about that as like a 13-year-old. Strengthening Your Grip. I remember that book. But I knew that. And so I was pretty dialed into what was going on. And even me had no idea that Hillsong was impacting my church, like through the music. And I think that is so just almost kind of devious. Like it's an interesting way to go about it, because we know like the theology in our songs matter. At least hopefully we all know that the theology in our songs and in our worship matter. And looking back, Shout to the Lord, all these other songs that they wrote in the early 90s and heading into the 2000s. And churches were still using, 10 years after they were written, like, they're not very good. They're not very sound. Like some of them are. And probably if you were to look at Hillsong songs today, I think Alan Parr did a video. I didn't watch it, but it's probably good, where he just like evaluated a bunch of worship songs and the theology in them. So maybe go look at that after, and see some of the songs. I'm sure there's a bunch of Hillsong songs in there, and you can look at the theology in it. But I would imagine that they weren't too sound, and they were impacting my church growing up. Like I said, a Reformed church. So it's just interesting that the amount of influence that this church had, this church that started in Australia, really far away, and then, crept into the United States, and through their music impacted the entire world. And I just think that's interesting, that we need to be so careful about these ministries that we're allowing to, different bands that write songs and we use in worship experiences, or, theologians that we're looking to, books that we're reading. I think we need to be a lot more careful. That's just kind of what I got out of it when I was watching that. There's a bunch of other things that are in my mind, but I want to talk more about the theology of those things. But those were like a couple of things that immediately just jumped out as just like surprising. Like I was not expecting that. I was not expecting to know a lot of like the songs and stuff. Because when I think of Hillsong, I think of, like I said, like the glitzy lights and the cool venues, and the guy with, a bunch of like ripped jeans and a leather jacket and big frame glasses going up on stage and giving, at least in my view, a TED talk and not a sermon. And that's just what I thought of Hillsong. But you watch some of those videos from this documentary where they're looking at, the 90s and early 2000s, and you're like, oh, that doesn't look too different. And that's interesting too. Like, look at Brian Houston and that clip that he kept on showing of the church that I see. He's wearing a suit. And you look at like the stage behind some of these things and like some of the singers, and you're like, that just looks like the church I grew up in. Like the fake plants, and the curtains from the 80s, and the green carpet, and like all those kinds of things. And to see them just over the years shift how they looked. Like Brian Houston wasn't a young man. Like, you should probably have it dialed in of like what your style is, as far as like what you think is like appropriate attire to wear in a worship experience. When you're preaching as a pastor, you got to think through that, whether you're going to wear a tie or not, whether you have to wear a suit jacket, whether it's okay to wear, flip-flops, like all those kinds of things. And I'm not saying really anything about those things. I think you can do it in any of those. But, to see someone shift over the years is interesting. Like I go back to Martin Lloyd-Jones and him famously wearing a suit everywhere, to the beach. He wore a suit to the beach, like hanging out with his grandkids. And like that guy knew, like, this is what I wear. And just to see Brian Houston like change his appearance so much throughout, and even like the style of words, like if you watch like that little part of the church that I see versus like some newer sermon, I think that you can see a lot of change in even how they sound. And to me, that's always like a red flag when someone changes like how they look and how they sound. And they're not like, discovering new things about their theology, or, coming out of a more conservative background or something like that. I just think that those moves are pretty manipulative. And I've seen that. I've even seen that here on YouTube of guys who, like, you look at their old videos and they sound like, like the Acts 29 guys. Like, they sound like Mark Driscoll. And then you watch the newer things and they sound, like Paul Washer. To me, like, I'm talking about tone and word choice, vocabulary, like even like body language. It's very interesting. I find that very manipulative. But let's see what you guys are saying just about some of your general thoughts. There's a lot of comments here, and I want to hear them. So if you're watching this thing, hop into the chat. I want to know what you think. So give me some of your random thoughts, and then I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some of like the big issues that I see. Because let's be honest, like, this documentary isn't good. Like, I don't think I'm going to read anything that's going to be like, actually, I think that this church was actually on the right track. Like, this is a pretty damning documentary. Like, there's nothing good really that I think is going to come out of it, as far as like, we can give the benefit of the doubt to them here. But let's see. Yeah, Genuine JC brings up a good point. If you want to watch it, you can do the 7-day free trial. I think there are some important issues that we as Christians should be aware of. Definitely. I definitely agree. That's what I did. I have a reminder on my phone for tomorrow morning to get rid of Discovery Plus. So hopefully I do, because sometimes I ignore those things. Don. Had known about the allegations against Brian Houston's father, but was saddened to hear the interviews with the students at the Hillsong College. Certainly some emotional, spiritual abuse. Definitely. Absolutely. A lot of the stuff, especially related to that college. I think anyone who's gone to Bible college, which me and my wife have, and our Bible college was great. Like, it was a good experience. But I think that you can see how some of these things could go off the rails pretty easy, and how there could be, like, it's just a really, like, it's a tender age. Like, you come from high school, and the safety of your parents' home, and a lot of these kids going to Bible college came from Christian homes, and so there's a certain level of safety there. And then you go and you trust these people, and you trust them to be like your old church, to be like your family, to have your back. And that could easily be manipulated. And I've seen that too often. But as I was watching that, like the fact that someone was, like, for part of their class credit, they're cleaning the church. Like, you should be getting paid for that. Like, that's not going to help you in ministry other than, having a servant's heart, which I'm sure is something that they said to get that done. But we'll talk more about that here in a minute, Don. Grandma Joe hopping in saying, I'm here. She says, yes, watched. My initial thoughts are usually these large megachurches start well and move off course. However, what was sad to realize is that it started with an agenda I was unaware of. Sad. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a lot of churches, when they get started, especially as like church plants, they want to see change happen. Again, like I think this is just going to always be a reference point for me, because, if you're familiar with my channel, I do have a lot of the rise and fall of Mars Hill resonates with me. As a guy from Seattle, as a guy who saw it, like, it resonates. And I think I'm always going to look back at that and, like, have reference points. But I mean, look at how Mars Hill started and some of the people, and you could see that they wanted to see people come to saving faith in Christ, and to be real and to be authentic. And then over time, that got manipulated. I think that's often the case. But then sometimes, and it's debated whether that was Mars Hill or not. There's leaders that have an agenda, and they get things started, and they have, like, I'm going to do this. I'm better than other people, like the church that I see, right? Like, but obviously with, what Don was saying about Fred Houston, I think that's his name, right? There were other agendas that were going on, and that just makes it even more devastating. Don hopping in again. Pretty certain Hillsong Atlanta may have just closed. The pastor announced congregation's loss of truth in Hillsong leadership, and they are shifting over to a new church body being created. Yeah, I heard about that there were some of these, like, I thought it was more of like the Hillsong family rather than like Hillsong in name, but they were like breaking fellowship with Hillsong, which I would say everyone should. Like, again, that documentary is not like, there's no debate. Like, you just go, oh, okay. And I think in a few years, we're going to see some things happen in Brian Houston's life. And again, there's not going to be any debate. Genuine JC, Don, I agree. As soon as I heard they had to sign an NDA to go to college, you knew it was bad. Yeah, I want to talk about that. The NDA. Oh my goodness. Micah, it's really insidious and has turned a lot of people off from the modern music that's actually really theologically sound. Example, yet not I, but Christ in me. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that song. Like, again, I'm pretty conservative, so a lot of the songs that I know are either of that ilk of like that 90s CCM, or Getty music and then hymns. Like that's kind of like what I'm super familiar with. So I'm not familiar with that song, and but I'm sure that there are good songs like being made. And then yeah, I think a lot of people will look at Hillsong and be like, oh, see, all of it's trash, and it's like no, you can't write off all of it. You need to be careful, but don't write off all of it. Well, you guys have a lot to say. I like this. All right, Grandma Joe. With great power comes greater responsibility. Oh, Spider-Man quote. Love it. The purposeful deception and manipulation, especially using music, is certainly what Scripture warns us about. Agree. Yet Not I is a Getty's tune. Oh, see, I didn't even know that. I take back what I said earlier. I don't think the Hillsong music crowd would be all that familiar with Getty's music. Probably not. Let's see. We know that even in driving, a few degrees off course can lead us to not arriving at our destination if we do not get back on course. This topic, our faith, etc., also can keep one from the destination. I agree. Let's see. Bible Man hopping in here. Is it the Bible Man? Do you have the purple suit? I'm not trying to make fun of you. I remember that character, and it was fun for me as a kid who liked superheroes. I believe even though Brian Houston resigned, I think he will still run it where people can't see. Yeah, it's interesting how these people, Paige Patterson, have influence in organizations after they're discredited and supposedly are, not around anymore. Let's see. Micah hopping in here again. People who didn't like Hillsong's music because it was so prominent in a lot of places I grew up in chose to use that dislike to push out all modern music. Yeah. I think a lot of people have agendas, and a lot of people don't like contemporary music. They want to stick to hymns. They want to stick to what they know, which hymns at one point were contemporary music. And, it's always been that way of like people being like traditional, and it's traditional as in 50 years ago, or, even in some cases 20 years ago, we only listened to this type of CCM. But I think a lot of people will do that with pretty much anything that happens wrong in Christianity. It's always used as like, oh, I'm going to be able to get my, agenda across because, look at that. That's where it always leads. It always leads to like Brian Houston and that kind of scenario. And that's not true. But I totally agree with you. Let's see. Don hopping in. Truthfully, shout to the Lord never troubled me. Some of the Bethel stuff concerns me more, but Bethel too uses music to spread their theological brand. Absolutely. I would say that Bethel and Hillsong are the same. They're peddling different things, but there's definitely an agenda in their music. Bethel, I think, is even more troubling, to be honest, because I think it's more subversive. There's things in there. I remember being at a church visiting, and they had a Bethel song going, and it was something about like the blood of Jesus is in my veins, like your blood flows through my veins, and it's like, oh, that's so troubling. And like you zoom out from that song, and it's pretty clear that they're trying to say you're a little God, and that's like that's Bill Johnson's like whole thing is, and like that crazy, like way off left field kind of deal of charismaticism. Like that's like a big thing of like, you're a little God, you can do all these different things. But yeah, it's very troubling. Cinema Grace. Hillsong in general cheapens a lot of Christianity. At least it seemed to me. Let's see sharing some more here. There was a cheapening of Christianity that I felt with Hillsong, and that could be reflected in the spiritual abuse. If you don't truly fear the Lord, then you'll want to strike craven terror in the hearts of men. Yeah, I think that's fair. Micah, Hillsong's music has always been the feel-good Jesus music, which I think has a time and place, especially for tiny humans, but it can't be the only music we hear and sing. I agree with that. There's a period of life that we need to hear certain types of theological songs. And, some of that feel good kind of music is great. For me, I look at worship music as, who's it intended for? It's not intended for me or you. Like we're praising God. He is, to quote Big Daddy Weave, rest in peace, by the way. Like that brother's with the Lord now from COVID. But love his voice. But to my audience of one, like that's a song that I remember always being on the Christian radio, Spirit 105.3 in Seattle. But yeah, who is this for? It's not for me or you. The worship is for God. And so we need to make sure that our songs, I think, in worship scenarios, should be directed toward God. And then this is a problem even with hymns, by the way. A lot of hymns are about like me and you being so great. Like a lot, I would say even perhaps the majority. If you look in conservative Baptist hymnals, I can't really speak for like Lutheran or Anglican hymnals, although I do have some. But conservative Baptist ones, I mean, it's about you and I are here to serve the Lord, and we're serving the Lord, and we're doing a great job at it. And it's like, are we really worshiping God by saying how great we are? Or like, I have a mansion up in glory. It's like, okay, but who gave you that mansion? Like, who made it so that you get there? All those kinds of things. So I think that there's a lot of troubling things in any kind of worship music scenario that we need to be careful. It's not just about like genre and style, but we need to look at the theology and look at the intention of what we're doing. Now, it's clear from the documentary that the intention was to sell. Like that they were wanting to reach out and take over the world, essentially. And, they had that one individual hopping in there all the time with like the suit on, talking about how it's not a church, it's a corporation. And, at first I was like, okay, like a lot of these people are hurt. And like, so we need to listen to them. Absolutely. But, hurt people. And so like we need, like when we hear anything, we need to like listen, be attentive, hear, especially from victims, we need to hear what they're saying. But we also need to think through things as well. And so like, I was like, okay, that's something you could say. I could say, like you can obviously see that this individual was hurt by the church, but like the first time he said it, I was like, I don't know, we'll see. Like, I'll keep on watching. I'm trying to keep an open mind. And then like 10 minutes later, you're like, yep, yep, 100%. This church is a corporation. They wanted to branch out. And, a lot of people are pointing at the fact that, Hillsong had music and they had a college and they had, expansion of all these different campuses. And I got to say, they aren't the only church who's doing that. And they aren't the only church that is not answering for, accusations of different levels and different types of abuse and, not doing anything and lawyering up and all that kind of stuff. So they're not the only ones, just saying. But they definitely had an agenda to try to be as popular as possible. And part of that was like using the celebrities and I will say it, using the celebrities, which I'm just going to say, this is just me. Like, this is my channel. I'm a pretty honest guy. I'm pretty see-through. I wonder what Judah Smith thinks about that whole thing with Justin Bieber and Carl Lentz. Because wasn't he friends with Justin Bieber first? Wasn't he like Justin Bieber's pastor before? Like, I grew up in Seattle, so I'm pretty familiar with Judah Smith. But yeah, like, I just would like to be the fly on the wall and just listen to what he actually thinks about that. Just a little tidbit. All right, but let's start like breaking down some of these things that I saw that were prevalent theologically. And once again, if you're here and you haven't done it, help me out. Hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, like I do this every Monday where I do this live show and talk about these things, these types of things, and have videos throughout the week. So think about subscribing to the channel. Also, John's here. Always want to give John a shout out. Just got on. Hope the conversation was good so far. I don't know. You'll have to watch after, bud. But let's talk about some of these things. I think that the main problem that I saw with the Hillsong documentary is a misunderstanding of the church. And I know that's like a broad statement, but I think in nearly every way that Hillsong does not meet the qualifications of a biblical New Testament church. Why would I say that? Well, first off, I would say that like leadership, like elders need to be qualified, guys. Like this, not anybody can just be a pastor. And like, I was watching the documentary and they're just like talking about talent. Oh, he's very talented. Even in the, like when Carl Lentz and Brian Houston awkwardly, by the way, which I think that there was some jealousy going on. But they're sitting there doing that documentary. It's like a real focus on, talent. Oh, he's a great leader. And this is something that I see so often when it comes to these bigger churches. They're very talented speakers. They're very charismatic. People really love to listen to them. Okay. Are they apt to teach? Like, it's not apt to talk. Like, if you're great at talking, Joe Rogan is great at talking. I'm not like saying everything he does is good. All right. I've watched like 4 clips of the guy, but he's good at talking. He has a lot of followers. Should he be in charge of a church if he were to say he was a Christian? No. like it's not apt to talk. It's apt to teach, like to open up the word of God and to share it. And, even as I'm listening, and again, I know that these clips that they're using are, taken out of context. And, they take specific, talking points and they want to show that off. But I literally never heard Carl Lentz or Brian Houston talk about Jesus. I just never heard him talk about Jesus. It's like, what are you doing? Like talking about like all these different other things and maybe some superficial like ways of talking about the gospel. But it's just like, Jesus, it's Christianity, Christianity. Like talk about Jesus, and they just didn't. And I think that's a theme, like not with just them, but with a lot of these guys. Where's Christ? Like Spurgeon said, if you don't preach Christ, then go home and never preach again. Like we got to preach Christ. He's the message that we need to give. He is the gospel. You can't have the gospel without Jesus. You can have emotionalism. You can have the lights going and, all of a sudden, the music starts playing in the background. And this is maybe just me. I hate that. I think it's so manipulative. But the music playing softly in the background while someone's talking in a, low tone about how all the failures you've gone through, all the pains, and you can see that there's acting going on there. That's not the gospel. The gospel are the facts that Jesus died for your sins. Like, talk about that. So they don't. So I think it's a misunderstanding of the goal of the church is not to have influence in the world. Post-millennialists tune out for this. But you're not going to. You're not going to take over the world with the gospel. In fact, Jesus says that we're going to face persecution, that we're going to go through hardships. Like that's what a Christian should expect. It doesn't mean that the kingdom isn't going to advance. It is, but it's Jesus' kingdom and he's building the church and, having influence over the world isn't how we do that. Isn't how we win people to Jesus. We do it through the gospel, through the faithful declaration of the gospel and faithful living of a gospel culture. Being welcoming, not because we want people to come in the door and have their butts in the seats so we can have the camera go and not see any empty spots, but because we love those people and we want them to come in and be welcomed to a relationship with Jesus. We want that. We want them to be set free from their burden of sin and to have reconciliation with the God of the universe. That's what we want. That's the goal of the church. Not to have influence. So I think that's a huge thing. The pastors being qualified, not just being talented individuals, not just being people who look good on a poster, things like that. Even, oh man, like when I was getting my thumbnail ready, there were so many pictures of Carl Lentz at like, like if you look at the quality, just zoom in on my thumbnail and look at the quality of Brian Houston's image, which is one of the best that I could find. And then like the quality of Carl Lentz, because like he has so many pictures where he's like on some like, red carpet kind of experience, in Hollywood or some famous place. And it's just gross. Like, this is a pastor. So he obviously wasn't qualified. Gifted, yes. But there were obviously things that were going on. Even things like, hey, here's something for all the pastors who might be watching this thing. If someone comes up to you and says, I've sinned, and, it's a sexual sin, and like a couple comes up to you and says that we've had premarital sex, like to ask like all the questions that he did, so inappropriate. Like, oh my goodness. And like to cause people to break up over that, like, into like, you can't talk to each other for 6 months and all these different things. And, you have to marry this individual now. Like, oh my goodness, don't do that. That just shows you're not qualified as a pastor to be gentle and to listen and to not like rush to judgment. And that to me was like a huge red flag. Like, I've had that. I've been a pastor. Like, I've had guys come up to me and be like, Dean, like, some people call me Pastor Dean. I don't really like that. Like, they just call me Dean, and just be like, Dean, I sinned. Like, I went too far with this girl at work, like things like that. That's happened. And you know what I say to that? Thank you for telling me. Like, I am not owed that information. I appreciate you being honest with me. Let's talk about this. And not just like immediate, like, judgment of, we're all sinners. Like, sometimes you do need to be really harsh, but a lot of times when people come to you, it's because they're repentant. And so you want to be soft with those people, gentle with them. They've already beaten themselves up enough about it. They're coming to you as a pastor and saying, like, I've done this thing. So that just like showed me not qualified. Let's talk about the accountability stuff. But before, let's say hi to some more people hopping in here. Is that true? Oh, I thought that it was him. I remember Ed Stetzer sharing that it was him. But Big Daddy Weave is still around. It's his brother Jay, the bassist, who long fought diabetes, who's now home with the Lord. Oh, well, my bad. That guy has a great voice. That's really all I was saying. But I thought Ed Stetzer shared like that it was him. Wow, interesting. Joshua Randall hopping in. Talent should never trump character. I totally agree. Don Zimmerman, a question I have. One young woman kept calling Hillsong a cult because the members were encouraged to volunteer their time, but isn't some of church volunteerism normal? Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people throw around the word cult too often. Like, I did a video about Church of God restoration before. I need to be careful. I'm not going to get myself into trouble. There's a lot of pastors who were supporting Henry Hildebrandt and the Church of God restoration because they were against the lockdowns, and they publicly promoted them. Now they've recanted. But before they did that, before anyone was doing that, I was saying, like, this guy's a cult leader. Like, it's very clear he's a cult. like this whole thing is a cult. Cult. That's a cult. Like, I don't know if you could classify Hillsong as a cult. Like, there are some things that you got to do with that. Like, every church has volunteerism. Absolutely. But whether it's forced, that's different. And whether you're abusing them while that, like these people aren't getting paid like these students and they're forced to do it. I think that's really wrong and might go down the road of like, I would need to do a lot more investigation in like those kinds of scenarios in order for me to be comfortable with calling them a cult. For now, I don't think that they are. I think they have a lot of, I don't even know what would be the adjective form of that, but cultish kind of behavior. But I don't think in their theology of what's on paper they would be against the gospel. Like they just don't preach it, and they don't live it. Like at least the leaders. Um, and there's all kinds of other issues. But I think that's a necessary component of being a cult, is to say that you're a Christian, and or at least a Christian cult, to say that you're a Christian and then not be. And I personally just don't see that with Hillsong. But, when people are hurt, they're going to look at it and say it's a cult. Like people who leave, like even backgrounds like mine, independent fundamental Baptists. Like people might look at IFB and like the movement and say that the whole thing is a cult. And I understand why they say that. I personally wouldn't. I think that they're like the whole independent, IFB, independent. Like, so each one should have to be evaluated on their own. I'm sure that there are many, maybe I shouldn't say many. I would say that there are some that are cults, but hurt people are going to say things, and we do need to pay attention to what they're saying, but also, like you said, evaluate it. I would say that volunteerism, that's normal for any church, but like how they were doing it, I would need to do a little bit more study into that and get more details. This leadership model seemed to really grow exponentially after Willow Creek leadership summits. Yeah, I've had a lot of interaction with different pastors who have gone to Willow Creek to learn from those kinds of summits and leadership things, and it's never good. It's never good. Tim hopping in. Oh, sweet. I made it to live. Yeah, you did. And you interacted here, Tim. Thanks for hopping in here. Micah, Hillsong basically to me has always felt like a youth group culture that never grew up. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Is this kind of megachurch stuff more of an American thing? Yeah, that's interesting. As someone who is not in the United States and who's been in Canada, we really only have like one megachurch that's like an actual megachurch, and that would be the Meeting House. And they're in the news. So I don't know. Like, I can only say from North American experience that there are some here in Canada, but like a culture-wise, the only one that I can think of, like where like everyone knows, like the leader would be Bruxy Cavey, and that's over in Ontario. But it might be. I don't know. If people around the world, let me know if you're in a different place and you kind of have that experience. Let me know. Let's see. Lonnie hopping in here. Gentleness of spirit seems to not be emphasized when looked at pastoral qualifications, which many times leads to the abuse. I agree. I think that there's a reason that certain people are hating on Gentle and Lowly. I really do. That book, amazing book, going to be talked about for literally centuries. It's going to be one of the classic Christian works in like 100 years. But there are certain people that really hate it right now. And I think that there's a reason for that. A lot of people like a lot of the other qualifications, like, well, I haven't cheated on my wife. Our marriage is strong and I preach well. I'm apt to teach. Well, you got to fit all the qualifications, folks, like not just some. So yeah, got to be gentle. Couldn't agree more, Lonnie. That's what Don says. And Joshua hopping in here again. Hillsong, through their want for cultural relevance, promoted carnal Christianity. The question is, are you a Christian with a question mark as opposed to a Christian with a period? I would not say a cult. Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I know that we like to put these labels on things and to kind of write things off when there's like this kind of behavior, especially. But I don't think I would be comfortable with calling it a cult either. Cultish behavior. But yes, I do think that there's a lot of carnality going on in that church, a lot of focus on the world. Like when you're trying to influence the world so much, and that's like really the focus of what you're doing, like you have to act like the world, right? Like you have to, if you want to be relevant to the world, there's something in it. And we're not talking about relevancy through your dedication to the gospel. And I'm not really even talking about like superficial things like clothing and, style and things like that. I'm talking about like behavior. if you're not going to be relevant to the world through like your fierce dedication to the gospel, you're going to have to find another way. And I think that they found a way through trying to look and be and sound and do things like the world. Like, and I think that's why they had such a problem with morality in the leadership, but also with volunteers. You know, as you watch the documentary, they're talking about all these people doing all kinds of unchristian things that would violate the word of God. And they're doing it at the church premises, you know, the venue that the church has. Like, I don't think so. I don't think that's right. So like my first thing would be like a misunderstanding of the church just in general, like the mission of the church. Accountability would be a huge part of that they just didn't have any. And even still, you know, a lot of these kinds of churches are run by some kind of board that you don't have access to, that you don't even know, that, you know, isn't part of like the elders who get up and they preach. You don't know these individuals. They're just like, you know, listed on a website page somewhere, and you don't really have access to them. You can't get their emails. You can't contact them as a church member. And they're the people that are in charge. Like even the fact that Brian Houston was a global pastor, like someone was saying in the documentary, I think he needs to step down as global pastor. And I was like, one man cannot pastor the globe. Like, no, like that's like a total misunderstanding of what a pastor is. And also like one man having that much influence is asking for it, you know, asking for trouble. Power corrupts. And so it's a good thing that we have accountability. And when you look at the New Testament, you know, obviously I'm a Baptist. So I think that, you know, churches should have accountability from the congregation. Yes, like I'm a Reformed Baptist, so I would go that a church needs to be elder led, deacon served, and congregationally ruled. That's how I view it. So I do think that there are decisions that an elder team makes, because when I look at Acts chapter 6, not to go too much into detail, but when we have a problem of racism, one of the first problems of the New Testament church, you know, certain people being overlooked at the cost of, or for the sake of other certain people, then, you know, it's brought to the elders, and the elders, the apostles, make a decision, but they also put it to the congregation. Pick out from among you 7 men of good reputation. So there's like leadership going on, like the elders making a decision, but there's also accountability from, like, that's a pretty big decision that the congregation got to make of who these individuals would be. And obviously with church discipline is a real thing. I have a video about it just recently talking about it. You know, we have ways of holding leaders accountable, but does Hillsong? It doesn't look like it, because when it was tried, they were just shot down over and over again. You know, just let out, you know, in the field for months, waiting for some kind of decision to be made by people, and no access to find out, you know, when that decision was going to be made, all those kinds of things. So there's like no accountability here. And I would say that accountability is a necessary component of a New Testament church. And so if you don't have that, you're not a New Testament church. If there's no way to hold your leaders accountable from the congregation, you know, and I'm not saying like if you're an elder-led or an elder-ruled church that you can't have that. There are ways that an elder-ruled church can have still, you know, some kind of accountability from the congregation, or that the congregation can have access through like a presbytery to be able to have accountability for their leaders. Like there are ways to do that. But there needs to be some kind of accountability. Then, so that's misunderstanding of the church. I would say misunderstanding of holiness. Like, okay, you believe the gospel, now what? And like we talked about, it's so much about like the relevancy, like they wanted to be relevant to the world, all those kinds of things. And so they just didn't care. It doesn't seem that way, that they cared about holiness in any way. They were consumed with wealth. Like even when they started listing like all the different properties that they owned in Arizona, and I was like, what? Like millions of dollars, millions and millions and millions of dollars of that this church just owns. It's so odd. Like, I'm not saying that we have to have, you know, church and our like leadership colleges, that different ministries that a church has, like that we need to run it in like rundown buildings in like the worst part of town, but also just like millions of dollars, really. I think it shows that there was like real focus on wealth. And like even like the preachers and sneakers guy started talking about Carl Lentz, and he got really upset, like because he was offended that he was consumed with wealth, that he was focused so much on money. So I just find that all so interesting. The NDAs, I think, is also a part of that, like a misunderstanding of holiness, because they're not holding people accountable. They're letting them go with whatever, they did, letting people still be like in charge of worship who are being accused of all kinds of things, or letting them continue in ministry because their victims had to sign NDAs to even get into college. NDAs are unbiblical. I'm just going to say it. No church should ever, in any scenario, force anyone to sign an NDA. It's not biblical. When you look at the New Testament, it's all about transparency. It's all about letting the truth be known. And what is the church so scared of? And this is something that I've dealt with personally many times, of people trying to just protect the reputation of a local church, protect the reputation of a leader. And we need to be careful about how we word this. Let's get a lawyer on retainer here. And like even like the journalist talking about like how it's like a crisis firm that's their lawyer who's on retainer. It's like, why do you need a crisis firm? Like, there's a reason for that. But yeah, the NDAs, all that kind of stuff. No accountability. I already talked about the misunderstanding of the gospel. Like, where is it? Is my question. Like in this whole thing, where's the gospel? Where is it? I didn't see it. There are 3 things, like 3 hour-long episodes. And I know it's edited and all that kind of stuff, but where's the gospel? I'm pretty certain that if someone was to like take all my videos and try to make a clip, like they would at least have to give some kind of form of gospel in it, because we should be talking about the gospel a lot. And I just didn't see it anywhere. And that influence being important, not gospel outreach. Like just talking about like broken people finding a home. Like, I mean, like, yes, but those are just felt needs. Like, let's get to the root of the problem, which will address the felt needs. Like the gospel, that's what people need. So let's address that. And that will have an impact on all the other things that are going on in people's lives. That's the most important thing. And like sometimes those felt needs need to be addressed like directly. But the gospel is everyone's main problem, and believing the gospel or not. Do you follow Jesus or not? That's the big question. And they didn't really seem too concerned about that. Let's see what else you guys are saying here. Lonnie's saying, we are currently going through Gentle and Lowly in our Wednesday Bible study at church. It has been eye-opening. Isn't it good, Lonnie? It's so good. I love it. One of my favorite books written in like the last couple decades. It's so good. Vintage Bowtie Guy. Hillsong's intention was never to minister to the world and produce disciples. It was to attract the world and grow exponentially, and therein lies its greatest weakness and the overall tragedy. I would agree. The gospel is their main problem. They didn't have it. They didn't preach it. They didn't live it. Simple as that. Genuine JC, a gospel that doesn't call someone to repentance is no gospel at all. Absolutely. There always needs to be a genuine sorrow over sin. I just did a video about Pilgrim's Progress. That's one of the main focuses early on. A genuine sorrow over sin leads to repentance. If you're not preaching about sin, you're not preaching the gospel, because it's a necessary component to understand that we have all sinned. So there's a need for repentance. There's a need for a savior. Absolutely. John Adams agrees with that from JC. Don, does anyone ever recall hearing about discipleship from the preacher pastors at Hillsong? Nope, not me. I don't remember that. John Adams, nothing more sketchy than an NDA. It's how you know something definitely went down, right? Like, why do you need to sign it? Like, and even these churches that like hide things and like don't want to come out with certain things, it's like, what do you got to hide? Like, sure, you don't owe everyone an explanation for every little thing that your church has ever done, but like, why are you only giving little tidbits of information? Shouldn't we be transparent? And especially as a church, like, we're sinners. We get it. We're sinners. We're like, as a Calvinist, like, we're totally depraved. That's my view. So like, yeah, as you get totally depraved people together, they're going to sin against each other. So it's like, not surprising. Just come out and say it. Like when abuse happens, like specifically, just say it. Say it happened and move on. Like, that's not like the big, like, oh, I can't believe it, scandalous moment, controversy, all that kind of stuff. Like, that's not the moment when there's like abuse. It's when people cover it up. And for some reason, we just have that tendency, because we love darkness rather than light, I guess. I get that Carl Lentz made money, but to flash it out the way with what he wears, I think says a lot about his personality. Yeah. I mean, I don't need to get into detail about it, but Joe Rogan talking about it. That's like the main clip that I've seen of Joe Rogan talking about Carl Lentz. I think he nailed it. I think he did. Genuine JC, clearly everything was about people's comfort. You are home. You are here. We love you, giving them what they want, not calling them to repent and believe. Absolutely. Sin abounds in darkness. NDAs provide the darkness. I agree. There's no biblical reason why a church should have anyone sign an NDA. And if you think that there's a huge problem with you and your church. Hillsong has church campuses in Phoenix, Mesa, and Scottsdale, which all are fairly close to one another. Yep. And each one, how many millions of dollars? Millions! So crazy. All right. I'm going to call it quits. I'm surprised I didn't have to call it quits earlier with what's been going on here at the home. Pray for me and my family, not to be too dramatic, but with Rona going on, it's no fun. But also, what is fun is, all right, now we're only 13 away from 1,000 subscribers. That's so cool. Thanks for watching, guys. I never want to take the fact that I'm just here in my basement in Saskatchewan, Canada, and I just flip on my camera and my lights and, start going live, and you guys show up and we get to have this conversation, have a little bit of community here and talk through some things. I think that is so cool. So I appreciate you guys watching. If you haven't already, do hit the like button. Means a lot to me. And think about subscribing if you're new to the channel. And I'll be back later on in the week, hopefully. I'm not going to make any promises this week. I don't know what's going to happen with Rona, how we're going to be affected. Right now it seems pretty good, but, it is what it is. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's not. We never know what this thing is going to do. So I'm not going to promise that there is going to be a bunch of videos this week, but hopefully I'll have a video come out on Wednesday and then once again on Friday. And who knows, when I hit that 1,000 subscribers, I'm definitely going to do some kind of special show, and it'll be fun. I'm going to try to make it fun. It'll be fun. But thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video, and I hope you have a really great day. I'll see you in the next one.